Long before Moses ever wrote down the words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," there was another scroll, a forgotten one. It wasn't written on tablets of stone, nor preserved in the ark. It survived the flood, barely. And according to rare whispers in ancient texts, it told a version of creation that began before time itself. But this scroll was hidden, intentionally, by the very men we thought were faithful preservers of God's word, the sons of Noah. What was in that scroll? Why would it need to be buried, concealed, or even destroyed? And why is it that after the flood, the most cleansing event in biblical history, a secret had to be protected instead of revealed? The answer, some believe, lies not in sin or punishment, but in the terrifying knowledge the scroll contained. Knowledge that could rewrite what we understand as the origin of heaven, earth, and even God's relationship with his first creations. This other scroll did not begin with the garden. It didn't start with Adam. It didn't even mention Eden until much later. Instead, it opened with a realm of light, one that existed long before stars or sky. And within this realm were beings of brilliance who received a sacred law and broke it. The scroll described a divine rebellion, not in the heavens we know, but in a former creation that collapsed long before the serpent ever whispered to Eve. That world was judged and erased, and from its ashes came the new Genesis we read today. The scroll was said to be entrusted to Noah, not as a reward, but as a burden. He received it alongside the covenant, hidden deep in the ark beneath sacred wrappings. But once the waters receded and the earth was dry again, Noah did not reveal its contents. Instead, he gathered his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and warned them, this must never be read aloud. What they did next would shape the silence that still echoes in Scripture today. Some say Shem wanted to preserve the scroll. He believed the truth, no matter how dangerous, was still part of God's plan. But Ham disagreed. He argued that mankind had barely survived judgment once, and if the contents of that scroll reached future generations, another fall would come. Japheth, torn between his brothers, suggested hiding it where no man could find it, until the time appointed by God himself. In the end, they acted together. They did not burn it. They did not read it. They hid it in silence. Ancient Mesopotamian fragments, suspiciously aligned with early post-flood genealogies, mention a record of the Skyfire, buried beneath a stone altar built by the sons of a righteous man. The altar was never used for sacrifice. It was built in a deserted plain and abandoned. Local tradition warns that those who dig beneath it will awaken the memory of the first fall. Scholars dismiss this as folklore, but some rabbis and early Christian mystics whispered that it was Shem's compromise to protect what must be preserved, but never revealed. This raises a disturbing question. What exactly did that scroll say that made even righteous men afraid to speak it? One possibility lies in the opening line, said to differ from Genesis. Instead of God created the heavens and the earth, it reportedly began with, before God moved upon the waters, he withdrew from another realm. That phrase alone would challenge everything we know. It suggests that our world was not God's first act of creation, but a response to something that went wrong. And if that were true, then perhaps our entire existence, our Eden, our history, our fall, was built upon the ruins of something older, holier, and more terrible. A world that was judged not for eating fruit, but for betraying something deeper, divine knowledge. The scroll reportedly warned that if humanity ever uncovered the knowledge lost in the first realm, they would not be enlightened. They would be undone. And that's why it had to disappear. Centuries later, traditions surrounding this hidden scroll began to surface in unexpected places. In the writings of certain sects labeled heretical by mainstream Judaism, there are references to a book before the beginning. These texts describe a law that predated the commandments, a light older than the sun, and a fall that occurred not in Eden, but in a realm of pure spirit. They even mention beings made of breath and flame who refused a divine command and were erased. But curiously, these texts always end with the same line. Their names are not remembered, for the sons of Noah sealed the truth. If these stories are echoes of the hidden scroll, then the sons of Noah weren't just patriarchs of new nations. They were guardians of something older than any empire, a secret powerful enough to destabilize human understanding of God's timeline. What they chose to bury wasn't just dangerous, it was prophetic. It revealed that the flood wasn't just about punishing human sin, but about burying a deeper failure, a spiritual one. We often view Noah's family as survivors and founders, but what if they were also silencers? What if they stepped off the ark not just to rebuild, but to conceal? In that case, their silence wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. By hiding the scroll, they allowed humanity to grow under a limited light, a safer version of the truth, one that spoke of Eden and Adam rather than what came before them. But not all agreed with that silence. In a fragment attributed to an early priestly scribe, there's mention of a great disagreement between Shem and one of his descendants. The younger man, reportedly blessed with dreams of fire and visions of angels, demanded to know the truth of the scroll. Shem, already old, warned him, "You seek what was sealed by judgment. If you open it, the fire returns." The descendant left in anger. His name is not preserved, but his legend survived among those who believe the scroll was never truly lost, just waiting. In later centuries, mysterious references to a pre-Genesis book appeared among early Christian mystics and desert fathers. One monk, writing in the 3rd century, claimed he found mention of a scroll that began not with creation, but with collapse. "The light withdrew," he wrote, quoting what he believed to be the first line of that ancient scroll. He claimed the original creation had no darkness until one being chose to withhold praise from the Creator. That refusal triggered a fall so devastating God unmade that world in silence. This, he said, is what the sons of Noah were sworn to protect. Why would such knowledge be dangerous? Because it implies a version of God's work that includes failure. A reality where divine perfection allowed disobedience, and where free will existed even before Eden. For theologians bound to a linear and infallible timeline, that was blasphemy. For others, it was revelation. If God gave choice before man existed, then the story of redemption didn't begin with Adam. It began in another world. And if that's true, the scroll wasn't just ancient. It was the origin of the war between obedience and rebellion. This scroll, some claim, also detailed a group of beings assigned to oversee the new creation, the earth we now inhabit. But one of them questioned the Creator's decision to start again. That being didn't fall like Lucifer. Instead, he disappeared. The scroll allegedly ended with a chilling phrase, "And the watcher who asked was unmade in the breath of God." Those who've studied early mystical texts believe this was the true beginning of the angelic schism, not rebellion, but doubt, and it was recorded, then hidden, by Noah's family. A few brave researchers have attempted to trace remnants of this lost scroll. They've followed threads through the Book of Jubilees, Enoch, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even the earliest Samaritan writings. In each, there are faint allusions. The story not told, the record not opened, the tablet buried in silence. And curiously, in some old Arabic and Ethiopian Christian manuscripts, there are diagrams, maps even, that hint at a burial place marked by 3 standing stones, stones said to be placed by the sons of a prophet after a flood. According to those same Ethiopian manuscripts, the 3 stones were arranged in a perfect triangle, each representing one of Noah's sons. At the center, a 4th stone once stood, but it was later removed. The locals believed it marked the entrance to an underground chamber. Legends say the scroll was sealed in a container of fire-resistant clay, wrapped in the skin of a sacrificed animal, and placed beneath the earth. The chamber was then sealed not only with stone, but with a curse, that any who unearthed it without divine permission would see what was meant to be forgotten. Whether that curse is real or not, one fact remains. Traces of this other Genesis continue to emerge. In 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, some fragments didn't match any known biblical text. A few contained phrases similar to those whispered about the hidden scroll, phrases like "creation before separation" and "the void was filled twice." These lines were dismissed by scholars as poetic anomalies, but some believe they were remnants, scraps of a story that should not have survived. In one particularly strange fragment, now held in a private collection, a passage describes the breath before breath and mentions that the first law was silence. If genuine, this would align with the theory that the original creation operated not through speech like "let there be light," but through presence, an existence beyond words. When that realm fell, God shifted to a new method, speaking creation into being. This suggests that Genesis as we know it was not the beginning, but a second attempt. But why would the sons of Noah, chosen to repopulate the world, hide such a revelation? The answer might lie in what they witnessed. The flood didn't just destroy the wicked, it erased civilizations, languages, even spiritual realms. The scroll may have revealed that what they saw was not a one-time event, but the echo of an older judgment. By hiding the scroll, they weren't just protecting mankind from knowledge, they were protecting the world from repeating what had already doomed another. Some theologians argue that this hidden scroll could be the missing link between Genesis and Revelation. After all, Revelation speaks of a scroll sealed with 7 seals, one that no one could open except the Lamb. What if that wasn't just symbolic? What if that scroll, in some spiritual sense, is the same one hidden by the sons of Noah? A record so ancient and so dangerous, only the end of time itself would justify its unveiling. This theory reframes Revelation not as a prophecy alone, but as the final chapter of a story that began long before Eden. Others suggest that the scroll contains more than just a history. It holds instructions, laws meant for beings not like us, commands written in a language unknown to mankind, possibly even unreadable by human eyes. This aligns with a claim found in a Gnostic fragment which mentions the writing of flame, readable only by those born of spirit. If true, it would mean the scroll was not just hidden because of its message, but because its very content required a different kind of being to understand it. And yet, there are those who believe parts of the scroll still exist today, scattered and incomplete, passed down through oral traditions, buried in apocryphal writings, or even encoded in symbolic language within the Old Testament. Some rabbis have noted the unusual repetition of certain patterns in Genesis, repetitions that might point to a concealed layer beneath the text. Could it be that the sons of Noah didn't erase the scroll, but hid it in plain sight, buried under metaphors and genealogies? One such example is the odd placement of the generations of the heavens and the earth in Genesis 2:4. It's the first time creation is described using the language of lineage, not construction, Some scholars argue this isn't just poetic, it's a reference to a former world, one that produced spiritual offspring before man was formed from dust. If that's true, then the other scroll didn't contradict Genesis, it completed it. And that's precisely why it had to be hidden. There's also a mysterious tradition among certain early mystics that says Noah himself regretted giving the scroll to his sons. One text, preserved only in a Coptic fragment, claims that Noah cried out to God after the ark landed, "The knowledge is too great for flesh. Let the earth swallow what the heavens could not contain." According to the same document, an earthquake occurred days later near the resting place of the ark, not one that destroyed, but one that sealed. A divine act of concealment. But the most haunting part, the same scroll is said to contain a prophecy, not about the past, but about the future, a day when man would seek knowledge above all else, when the hidden things of old would rise again, when the scroll would no longer be hidden by men, but by time itself, until a voice from the heavens declares, "It is time." In that day, the scroll would be found, not by scholars, but by a child, a dreamer, or someone chosen not for power, but for purity. This prophecy echoes a phrase found in a disputed verse of the Book of Jubilees. "The scroll shall return with the fire, and the fire shall not consume it." That may sound symbolic, but some interpret it literally as a reference to divine preservation, a hidden truth that will survive judgment, war, and even the end of the world. And when it's read, the foundations of man's understanding will be shaken, because it will not begin with Adam, but with what Adam replaced. And here lies the core of the scroll's danger. It doesn't just tell a different story, it tells us we're not the first, that before humanity there was something else, not animals, not angels, something between, a race of spirit and will created in beauty but broken by pride. Their fall wasn't recorded in Genesis because Genesis was written to begin after them, and their story, buried by flood, sealed by stone, hidden by Noah's sons, is what the other scroll reveals. Some ancient commentators hinted that these pre-Adamic beings were not entirely destroyed. According to the first book of Enoch, there were watchers who fell, but others who simply vanished, or were locked away. The scroll allegedly described a realm between realms, a sealed dimension where the remnants of this former creation were cast, not to be punished, but to be forgotten. A place so disconnected from time that even the angels were forbidden to speak of it. A spiritual exile, unreachable, unless the scroll were read again. Curiously, certain Jewish traditions describe Shem not only as the father of nations, but as a priest-king who preserved secret teachings. Melchizedek, the mysterious figure, who appears in Abraham's time with no genealogy, is believed by some to be Shem himself or his successor, still guarding that ancient knowledge. If true, the priesthood of Melchizedek wasn't just a spiritual order, it was a protective line, a lineage sworn not to teach, but to delay, to hold back a truth too overwhelming for fallen ears. In this light, the sons of Noah weren't just founders of nations. They were keepers of the breach, standing between two worlds, two creations, two truths. The scroll wasn't erased out of rebellion, it was hidden out of mercy, because if mankind had learned too soon what came before them, they might have followed the same path. The sons of Noah weren't deceiving us. They were protecting us from repeating a fall that even angels could not survive. And yet, something is changing. Ancient mysteries are being uncovered. Books long lost are being translated. Fragments thought meaningless are being re-examined. It's as if the earth itself is preparing to unseal what was once hidden. The question is, when the scroll resurfaces, physically, spiritually, or prophetically, will we be ready to hear what it says? Or will we do what the sons of Noah did and bury it once again? There's one more clue, found not in a scroll, but in the stars. Ancient astronomers once believed that the constellations held stories older than any written text. Some early Hebrews viewed the night sky as a celestial record, where the first revelations were etched by God himself, before man walked the earth. A rare rabbinic commentary refers to the constellation of Orion not just as a hunter, but as the one who saw the first fall. What could that mean, unless there was a fall before Eden, before Adam? The same commentary mentions that Ham, after the flood, tried to replicate the design of the constellations in stone, not as idols, but as a map, a hidden map that pointed back to where the scroll had been sealed. These stones were later misinterpreted by other cultures as pagan altars, but originally they may have been markers left by a son of Noah who feared what had been buried, but also feared forgetting it entirely. If true, the scroll's location might not be lost. It might be marked in the stars and the earth at once. Over time, as generations passed, the memory of the scroll faded, but whispers remained. The Essenes, keepers of the Dead Sea Scrolls, wrote cryptic warnings about a record not to be broken and a light too great for the sons of dust. Some believe these were indirect references to the other Genesis scroll. The Essenes never claimed to possess it, but they may have known of its existence. They believed some truths would only be revealed when the final age approached, when mankind hungered for origins once more. And isn't that where we are now? In a time when knowledge is exploding, ancient texts are resurfacing, and the boundaries between faith and archaeology are collapsing, the silence of Noah's sons may be reaching its end. If the scroll still exists, whether physically or spiritually, it's beginning to speak again, and it may not whisper, it may roar. The only question is, will we listen, or turn our faces away like they once did, afraid of a truth too heavy for the world? Some believe the scroll doesn't need to be physically found, that its contents are awakening in visions, in revelations, in sudden understandings that strike those who seek God deeply. The sons of Noah buried the words, yes, but the Spirit of God can resurrect even what was sealed in silence. That's why, more than ever, people across the world are sensing that what we've been taught is only part of the story. The foundation is real, but something deeper still sleeps underneath. There's beauty in the idea that God allowed it to be hidden, not out of deception, but out of divine timing. Humanity needed to walk through generations of faith, law, prophecy, and grace before being ready to glimpse what came before it all. And maybe that's the test. Will we pursue this truth out of pride or with trembling reverence? Because if the scroll speaks again, it won't flatter us. It will humble us. It will remind us that we are not the first, and we may not be the last. In this sense, the other scroll of Genesis is more than a book. It's a mirror buried deep in history, waiting to show us what came before light, before dust, before the name of Adam was ever spoken. A world that failed, not because it was evil, but because it forgot the source. That's the final warning of the scroll, according to those rare fragments that survive. When the created forgets the creator, not even eternity can preserve it. And maybe that's why Noah wept when he received it, because he saw in it the pattern that would return. He knew that mankind would once again rise, forget, and fall. And perhaps he prayed, not that the scroll would be erased, but that someone in the end would finally understand it, not to rebuild the old world, but to prepare for the one that is coming. So if one day the scroll is found, or even if it's never unearthed, its presence will still be felt. Because the longing for origin, the ache for something deeper, is itself a kind of calling. A whisper from the past to the present. Remember what was lost, so it may never be lost again. The sons of Noah were guardians of a secret, not enemies of truth. They carried the weight of a world they didn't destroy but chose to bury, and that burden may soon pass to us. Will we guard it again, or will we open it knowing the risk and the revelation? Because perhaps the greatest truth of all is this: God never meant for the scroll to stay hidden forever, only until the appointed time, until a generation would seek not to dominate truth, but to kneel before it. And if this message has stirred your heart, then don't let it fade. Share this with someone who seeks deeper truth. And tell us, from which city or nation are you watching this? Because together, we are the generation that might finally remember what the sons of Noah chose to forget.